I think it's such a fantastic song. You asked me, I forget, how can I forget about Dylan's contribution when he was the guy who woke us all up?
By the time Led Zeppelin's first album detonated into record shops in early 1969, the British music scene had already been through a full cycle of cultural evolution. Skiffle had come and gone. The Mersey beat wave was cresting. The psychedelic turn had taken hold. But what Zeppelin brought was something deeper, darker, and more elemental, a sound that was less trend and more invocation. Yet for all their otherworldly force and innovation, the band's lead singer Robert Plant has never pretended that Led Zeppelin arrived fully formed. "We didn't come out of a vacuum," Plant told American broadcaster Charlie Rose in a 2005 interview. "We were living and breathing the music that had shaped us, those wild American records that hit you in the gut and stayed in your blood." In that candid conversation, Plant named 7 tracks he considered the greatest rock and roll songs of all time. Songs that weren't just personal favourites, but cornerstones of his creative DNA.
In your cities, you had music from New Orleans, Philadelphia, Chicago. So many different cities had so much absolutely different music to offer us.
And in doing so, he peeled back the curtain not only on his influences, but on the broader cultural roots that fed one of the most significant voices in modern music. These were not the usual textbook picks from the rock canon. There was no Chuck Berry or Little Richard, no Beatles, despite their undeniable reach. Instead, Plant's selection was more eclectic, more visceral, a reflection of someone who had inhaled the smoke and the sex and the sweat of early rock and blues in its most intoxicating forms.
Big hunk of love, Elvis Presley.
It is difficult to overstate the seismic impact Elvis Presley had on young musicians on both sides of the Atlantic, but for Plant, it was not the slick balladeer or the Hollywood heartthrob that left the deepest impression. It was the feral energy of A Big Hunk of Love. Recorded during a short break from Presley's military service in 1958 and released the following year, the song barrels forward with raw urgency. Its opening piano hammering and Presley's unrelenting vocal swagger made it a lightning bolt to the senses. That record, it just punched its way out of the speakers, Plant recalled. There was this electricity in his voice that wasn't about technique, it was about instinct. That primal edge was what captivated Plant, who would go on to imbue his own performances with a similar unfiltered spirit. Presley, in Plant's words, didn't just sing songs, he attacked them. The influence of Elvis can be heard across Zeppelin's early material, from the galloping rhythm of Good Times, Bad Times to the snarling vocal phrasing on Communication Breakdown. Even in his more recent solo work, Plant has continued to pay homage, occasionally slipping in Presley covers in live performances, often with a half smile that suggests old devotions die hard.
Smokestack Lightning by Howlin Wolf.
Where Elvis brought swing and sex appeal, Chester Burnett, better known as Howlin Wolf, offered something more dangerous. His 1956 recording of Smokestack Lightning is among the most influential blues records ever made, and for Plant, it was gospel. There's this huge primal presence in Howlin Wolf, Plant said. We hammed it up, trying to get as black as we could. As they say in England, a miss is as good as a mile, but occasionally we got there. That self-deprecating aside masks a more complex truth. While Led Zeppelin, like many British blues bands, drew heavily from African-American music, their interpretations walked a fine line between homage and appropriation. Plant has been frank about this over the years, increasingly conscious of the power dynamics involved, but there is no doubting the sincerity of his reverence. Listening to Smokestack Lightning, with its hypnotic riff and Wolf's unearthly howl, one can hear the genetic code of Zeppelin's bluesier material, tracks like You Shook Me, Since I've Been Loving You, and In My Time of Dying. Yet Plant was never a mimic. What he took from Howlin Wolf wasn't just a style, it was a spirit. That sound, he told Rose, was the sound of survival, of hurt and lust, and the need to be heard.
I think the Rumble by Wray.
When Wray released Rumble in 1958, it became one of the very few instrumental tracks ever banned from American radio. No lyrics, no vocals, just a thick, swampy guitar tone and a slow, menacing strut. The fear, apparently, was that it might incite teenage delinquency. For Plant, that was all part of its appeal. Rumble was the dirtiest thing I'd ever heard, he said. It had this weight to it, this violence. It was like the guitar had grown fangs. Ray's use of power chords and deliberate distortion laid the groundwork for what would become heavy rock, punk, and even metal. Jimmy Page would later credit Wray as an influence on his own sonic experimentation, and it's easy to hear Rumble's DNA in the ominous crawl of Dazed and Confused, or the bone-rattling riffs of Whole Lotta Love. But for Plant, Ray's genius was also in what he left out. There's space in that record, space that sucks you in. It's not showing off, it's summoning something.
I think Dion,
less abrasive but no less influential, was Dion DiMucci, better known simply as Dion. Known for his streetwise swagger and doo-wop roots, Dion was a teenage heartthrob with grit. Plant singled out Lovers Who Wander, released in 1962, as a personal favourite.
I found that place for lovers who wander, yeah, whoa.
With its rolling rhythm and lovelorn lyricism, it might seem a surprising pick amid the more confrontational sounds of Howlin Wolf and Wray, but it reflects a lesser-known side of Plant's musical upbringing. There was a vulnerability in those early rock and roll records, he said. They weren't all bravado, there was heartbreak too, and that's what makes them real. Plant has often spoken about the emotional range in early American music, how it could swing from lust to sorrow in a single verse. It's a sensibility that can be heard in Zeppelin's own genre-defying catalogue, where thunderous anthems sit alongside tender ballads like Thank You and The Rain Song. Dion, in Plant's view, embodied that duality. He was cool, but he felt things, and that's a rare thing to pull off.
I think Jefferson Airplane's White Rabbit was...
Fast forward a few years, and the music scene had shifted. The summer of love had arrived. LSD had become a creative muse, and the sound of rock had stretched into the surreal. In this context, White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane stands as a definitive statement. Written by Grace Slick and released in 1967, the song is both a psychedelic anthem and a feminist broadside. With its Alice in Wonderland references and bolero-style crescendo, it captured the zeitgeist of its time and left an indelible mark on Plant. That track is like a hallucination, he said. It starts like a whisper and ends like a sermon. It's not difficult to draw a line between White Rabbit's atmospheric build and Zeppelin's own flair for the dramatic. Think of Kashmir, with its escalating grandeur, or No Quarter, with its dreamlike dissonance. But beyond the musical parallels, Plant seemed drawn to the sense of otherworldliness. It takes you somewhere else, he said, and isn't that the whole point?
from LA called Love with Arthur Lee.
If White Rabbit was a psychedelic call to arms, A House Is Not a Motel by Love was its darker, more disillusioned cousin. Released the same year on the band's magnum opus Forever Changes, the song moves from acoustic fragility to electric chaos in the space of 3 minutes. Written by the enigmatic Arthur Lee, it's a haunting vision of America in turmoil, part love letter, part premonition. Plant held the track in high regard. Arthur Lee was a poet, he said. He could see the cracks before the rest of us did. The lyric, "The news today will be the movies for tomorrow," has been cited by Plant as an example of Lee's eerie prescience, and it's not hard to see why the song resonates in an era of endless headlines and cinematic violence. In terms of influence, the song's shifting dynamics and haunting atmosphere prefigure much of Zeppelin's more experimental work, but its impact on Plant was just as emotional as it was musical. "It's beautiful and terrifying," he said. "It's like watching the sun set on something sacred."
Dylan's got to be one more cup of coffee, I think.
Of all the artists Plant praised in the interview, none received more effusive acclaim than Bob Dylan. Dylan was the guy who woke us all up, he said. Out of all of those people who were around, Dylan made it sexy, and he also brought it home in such a vital way. The song Plant chose was not from Dylan's protest phase, but from desire, specifically the eerie, gypsy-inflected "One More Cup of Coffee."
One more cup of coffee before the road.
With its winding melody, exotic violin, and mystic lyrics, the song feels like a crossroads between folk and something far older. "It's like a prayer," Plant said, "but one where you're not sure who's listening." Dylan's influence on Led Zeppelin has often been underplayed, but Plant's lyricism, from the mythic imagery of Stairway to Heaven to the mysticism of Achilles' Last Stand, owes more than a passing debt to Dylan's narrative ambition and literary sensibility. Dylan showed us that songs didn't have to end where they began, Plant said. They could roam, they could get lost, and sometimes that's where you find the truth. In selecting these 7 tracks, Plant wasn't trying to create a definitive list. He wasn't building a hall of fame or curating for prestige. He was speaking as a listener, as someone still awed by the power of a great record. What links these songs is not genre or popularity, but vitality. Each track has blood in its veins. Each one shaped not just Plant's artistic direction, but his emotional compass. And in listening to them, we hear not just the origins of a band, but the birth of a musical worldview that would echo for generations. "Those records were our compass," Plant said. "They didn't just show us where to go, they showed us why it mattered."